It's just a chart. That's not good either.
Okay. Good evening. I'd like to call the Government Operations Committee for Monday, November 1st, 2021. Can you call a roll, please, Tracy?
Bala?
Here.
Hayleitner? Here. Bongard?
Here.
Bancroft?
Here.
Lencioni?
Here.
Petrola?
Here.
Wirball?
Here.
Besner?
Here.
Weber?
Here.
Thank you. We got one out of this item tonight. Can I have a motion and a second, please?
Weber will move it. Second.
Moved by Weber, second by Lencioni. Roll call, please.
Petrola?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Bala?
Yes.
Hayleitner?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Bancroft?
Yes.
Lencioni?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Okay, now we go to Human Resources Department. Recommendation to approve a letter of engagement with Clark Hill to provide representation and legal advice for the City of St. Charles in the police pension application matter. Good evening, Jennifer.
Thank you. Good evening. This is more of a housekeeping issue. Back in August, the City Council approved an engagement letter with Heinzelman Law to work on this specific issue. She has since joined the firm of Clark Hill, so a new engagement letter has been issued. There's no change in the hourly rate. There's no change in the estimated cost, and both Attorney Nick Peppers and I recommend approving this engagement letter.
Any questions or comments? Yes.
Yeah, I just have a question. I'm not familiar with this case, and I would like to request at another meeting an executive session just to be briefed on what this case is about. I don't have an issue with this, but I just want to be familiar with it in the future.
Certainly.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments or concerns? Okay. Motion and a second, please.
So move.
Second.
We're all seconded by Petrola. Roll call, please.
Petrola?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Bala?
Yes.
Hayleitner?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Bancroft?
Yes.
Lencioni?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Now we have the Finance Department. Recommendation to authorize the Assistant Finance Director to execute the Risk Insurance Program renewal for the year beginning December 1st, 2021, in the amount of $845,794. Good evening.
Good evening. Yes, as you stated, tonight I am presenting the committee with a recommendation to execute contracts with the city's 3 existing risk insurance providers in order for us to renew our liability insurance policies, which expire on December 1st this year. IPRF is the provider who underwrites our workers' compensation insurance. Travelers underwrites our general liability, law enforcement, automobile, public official, umbrella insurance, as well as our employment policies insurance. And Chubb underwrites our property and inland marine insurance. The total cost of the insurance coverage this year is $845,794, which is a $121,000 increase as compared to the prior year. $90,000 of this increase is for property insurance liability alone. As stated or noted in the executive summary, the magnitude and frequency of natural disasters occurring over the last several years are driving the cost of property insurance upward. And as we all know, they do not go and collect those extra dollars from the insurer, but they spread that along to all insurance holders. So what we're looking at here is this premium going up, but maintaining our current levels of coverage. In the premium summary that also was included in your packet, there was a lower cost provider for insurance. However, the lower cost provider, if we opt to go that way, significantly reduces our earthquake and flood insurance. Currently, we have levels of $25 million with the current insurance providers. If we were to go with the lower cost option, these would drop to $13 million and $11 million. So that is why the lower cost provider is not being recommended. In most respects, our insurance coverage, limits and our deductible levels are remaining intact if we move forward with our current risk insurance providers' policies. And that is what is being recommended tonight, and I will answer any questions I can.
Questions from the council?
No.
Yes, Alderman Payne.
Can I just thank you, Colleen? What a wonderful executive summary. I mean, really, you left all the questions on the table, so thank you, thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, okay.
Just, are you happy with Assurance Agency and their efforts?
Very much so. They did a full marketing for us last year, and they did 3 years before that, and 3 years before that. This year, they reached out to 5 different insurance agencies for quotes on our property insurance, and also 3 other agencies for quotes on our workman's comp insurance.
Yes, Alderman West.
Question, how many claims have we had with any of these, with our insurance in the past, I don't know, say 5 years?
Okay. With respect to workman's comp insurance, we've had last year $139,900, $119,422 the year before, $790,000 the year before that, $96,000 the year before that, and the 5th year $689,000. With respect to the other coverages, for the total of general liability, public officials, employee practices, and law enforcement, we had $21,787 last year, $9,000 the year before that, $26,500 the year before that, $96,700 the year before that, and $87,780. For property insurance, last year we had $24,652 and nothing else. However, this is one of those insurances that you want to pay and hope you never have to use because the deductibles, obviously there are substantial deductibles on the different premiums that we pay, but that is...
No, I understand. That's, you never want to go cheap on insurance. Trust me, yes, I understand. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions or comments from the committee? Okay, motion and second, please.
I'll second.
Moved by Warbaugh.
You have to move. Oh, sorry, so move. I thought somebody...
Okay, who seconded?
Second.
A second by Petrilla. Roll call, please.
Petrilla?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Bala?
Yes.
Payleitner?
Yes.
Bonegard?
Yes.
Bancroft?
Yes.
Lencioni?
Yes.
Motion passes, thank you. 6A, recommendation to approve the recommended 2021 property tax levy for SSA 1A, SSA 1B, SSA 5, SSA 6, SSA 7, SSA 10, SSA 13, SSA 21, and SSA 57.
Okay. The city has 62 designated SSA service areas within its boundaries. Currently, 9 of these SSAs, as listed in the executive summary, are receiving services that are above and beyond those amenities provided to the city in general. These extra services include upkeep of parking facilities in SSA 1A, the provision of economic development and promotional activities in SSA 1B, and the maintenance of stormwater detention and retention areas in the other 7 SSAs listed. In order to recapture the costs of the city providing these extra services, we levy a special service area property tax. It should be noted that only those who benefit from the special services being provided are taxed. So those taxes remain within these boundaries of the special service area. The recommended tax levies are detailed in the executive summary and are the same as the amounts levied in the prior fiscal year.
Okay, any questions or comments? Okay. Moved by Lencioni.
Second.
Second by Bancroft. Roll call, please.
Petrilla?
Yes.
Wirball?
Yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber,
Yes.
Bala,
Yes.
Hayleitner,
Yes.
Bonegard,
Yes.
Bancroft,
Yes.
Lencioni.
Yes.
Motion passes, thank you. Item 6C, recommendation to approve the preliminary estimate of 2021 property tax levy in the amount of $24,576,475.
Thank you, and I've invited Nick Narducci to the council meeting tonight here as well, the committee meeting, to go over some additional information. I'm going to do some brief opening comments. As we discussed at the fall retreat this year, one of the items City Council is tasked with every year is reviewing and approving the property tax levy extension that will be extended to all of the residents of the city and all of the property owners. Just as some brief historical notes, for the last 10-plus years, the property tax levy has been held flat. That is based on a dollar amount. The rationale for this initially was when revenues and EAV started to decline in 2009. It was a way to ensure the city did not lose any of the revenue stream that we were currently relying on. But as the EAV began to increase, we did not change that policy to start capturing some of that revenue stream. Didn't make a lot of sense at that time, but now, unfortunately, we have not kept up with the inflationary amounts. As the Assistant Finance Director just pointed out, cost of services, cost of doing business continues to go up every year. One of those items being over $100,000 increase just on our insurance coverages. So we have to continue to find revenue streams, and especially with COVID, that has become very important to find reliable sources of revenue that are not subject to the whims of those people purchasing services, like a sales tax, for example. And last year, I know it appears that we may have come out okay with a surplus in the end of the year after our audit. However, the major reasons for that were the fact that we got some additional income from the CARES Act money, as well as not funding some of our capital replacement programs, which we cannot continue to do each year. Eventually, we'll have to start cutting services or cutting some of those replacement schedules, such as vehicles for police officers, fire department equipment, and the like. The other alternative is that we begin to cut service levels of expectations of things that residents have come to rely on. So it's important that we continue to be able to maintain these service levels, as well as some of the offerings that we currently have in the city. And this is the way that we do it. It's a reliable, continual source of revenue for the city. 30% of our general fund operations is coming from property taxes, so we are trying to make sure that's a sustainable source of revenue for us. As brought up as well at the retreat, is that our credit rating agencies do recommend that we are having those sources of revenue that are not subject to the whims of purchasers, and it is a continually reliable source. This is the one way that we can get that as a city. The other item that we do need to keep a watch on is right now we do have some increasing costs in some of our debt service payments. As those payments continue to escalate for some of the projects we've had to take on for infrastructure improvements in an aging city, we will have to dedicate more of our funding sources to making those debt service payments, which will continue to escalate for the next several years. So cost of doing business has gone up. We want to make sure that we can stay with that and continue to tackle the projects and service levels that are expected of the city, and we can continue to make the city a better place. So with that, I will turn this over to Ms. Narducci to go over the specifics of the dollar amounts regarding the property tax levy that we're recommending tonight.
Good evening. Can I have your name and address for the record, please?
My address, oh, sure. It's Nick Narducci. My address is 1010 Burlington Avenue, Lisle, Illinois.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. What I wanted to do was to cover an item that's not in your packet, just to give some general background on how the taxes are calculated, the equalized assessed value. And again, you're seeing that up on your screen. And all I wanted to point out was, I know many of you know this already. I'm not trying to insult anyone. Just wanted to make sure we are all on the same page. And if you look at this column here, which I know you can see on your screens, all I'm trying to point out is the different categories. Now, this tax bill, this tax extension is from 2019, and those are the categories that we tax for, and you can see the amounts. And the other thing I'm trying to point out is you're in two different counties, Kane and DuPage. Substantial amount is in Kane, as you can see. And the definition here for calculating EAV is directly from the Kane County Clerk's office. So all the township assessor does is he takes a fair market value of what they estimate that to be over a 3-year period, multiply that by 33%. And then the calculation is fairly simple. We look at the fair market value of a home in this case is $400,000, multiply that by 33 1/3 to come up with the equalized value. That's done for every property. And we take that per $100 and multiply it by the county's, by the effective rate, for all the taxing districts. So someone who has a $400,000 home could expect to pay about $10,000, $11,000 in taxes. So I didn't want to spend too much time on that, but you could see the majority of your property is residential, 66%, and a combination of about 34 or so between industrial and commercial. The other item I wanted to point out quickly is something that Heather just mentioned, is that the transfers from, and you talked about that a little bit, from 20 to 21, you could see that the debt payments were roughly $3 million, and then the other transfers are 3.2. In the 21-22 budget, the debt increased to 4.9, and you decreased the transfers. Now, that debt service is going to continue to increase. It's going to either stay level or continue to increase. So what did you do is you decreased the transfers to these particular funds here. Now, you did fund your vehicle replacements for 2 years now, and computer replacements, capital improvements, internal service, you have a copier replacement fund in addition to that. But it appears that that's how you made things balance out. Now, you did have some revenue increases as well, and again, those are the things that have to level out. And then what Heather mentioned is something that we didn't mention too much at the strategic planning session, and that was that we mentioned this part a little bit about the debt and the unfunded pension liability going up, but we did not talk about the reliance on economically sensitive revenues, and that's something any credit rating agency would like to see. You have much more control over the property tax than you do of these economically sensitive ones. So if there's any questions on that, I could start into the rest of the handout that you have.
Any questions at this time? Okay. Oh,
Okay.
yes, no problem.
I have to get
Where did the number 4.99% come from for the tax levy?
set by statute.
But who chose that number to put in the packet, 4.99%?
Well, that's something that I'm throwing out to you. That's the limit that you could ask for, 4.99.
What happens if you go over that amount?
You have to do a truth and taxation hearing. Go ahead.
You have to go through some additional requirements for the statute, public hearings, those kind of items to increase it beyond that. That's what we're allowed as a municipality to go up to without any of those additional notifications. Just based on increased cost of doing business, that's the number the legislature decided on.
Okay, but 4.99% was determined how? How was that determined?
Are you talking at the staff level or at the state level?
In the letter, in the packet, it says staff would like it to be at 4.99%.
That's correct, because that's the limit that we are allowed to go up to, and because we haven't captured any of that additional revenue for the last 10 or so years, trying to capture some of that and make up for some of those steady.
So that is the objective, is 4.99%?
That's correct.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
Okay, continue,
Thank you. Now, next I wanted to go over the handout, and I did not want to spend a lot of time on the executive summary. Also didn't want to spend a lot of time on the summary itself. We could certainly come back to this if there's any issues regarding that. But I wanted to start actually on page 3, if I could. And on page 3, this really depicts what Heather had talked about in her summary. If you look at the years 2010 to 2018, you could see that's where the property taxes were kept flat. And you could see them here. I know it's difficult for a lot of folks to see, but it's kind of clockwise. It's depicted in the graph here. You can see that your EAV, all the value that you tax on, is very high. That continued to decrease, and in 2014 that started to go up. But you could see that the dollar amount was kept flat, and that's the reason for that difference. And you can also see how that affects the property tax rate. But again, that just kind of graphically depicts what the chart shows and what Heather had mentioned, that you did establish a policy not to increase property taxes while the EAV was decreasing, and you kept that for a number of years. And then when you did increase, you only increased by the EAV increase per year rather than the statutory limit. You could certainly go either way on that or somewhere in between. But that's what we're trying to point out. And over that period of time, prices did increase substantially. I pointed that out in the narrative here. And also that it did, but the prices did increase beyond that point, and the taxes did not increase commensurately with that. If I can move to the next slide. All I'm trying to point out here is the property tax that's foregone. So if you look at this column here on the foregone side, if you would have levied at what the EAV increases were per year, you would have collected $6.3 million over that period of time. If you levied at the 4.99, you would have had $11 million. Now here I just want to point out is that there is something that was cut off, and I should have caught this before I sent it to you, but it does say that the EAV increased 19.2%, and what's cut off is that the property tax receipts increased 8.4%. And again, for a portion of that, you know, while the EAVs were decreasing, that's what you intended to do. You intended to levy at a flat amount, watch that amount increase. Once it hit increases, I don't know that the policy was looked at then, but this shows the effects of that, and it shows the amount that you could have collected. When I go to the next slide, what I'm trying to point out here is comparables, and it's, you know, I've been doing this a lot of years, and it's really difficult to find a comparable community, especially to a town like this. And all I did was I took the towns that are in Kane County, and obviously I took out the ones you don't compare to, the large ones and the small ones. But when you're looking at tax rates, it's important to note that your tax rate does not include your fire levy, and these other communities do not. Now, is it a direct one-to-one relationship, adding that tax levy, that fire levy? No. Because when you have a fire district, you have a wider area, you know, that they're servicing. They have a big administrative staff, which, you know, you don't have here directly with those. But there is something you have to add because fire departments are very expensive to run. And the other thing I wanted to point out is that the other two communities that I compared to, South Elgin and Algonquin, also have a park levy. So are you an accurate, comparable community to them? Well, probably not, because they have to levy for that as well when you have a separate park district. But if you could see that the highlighted amount in yellow, where you're at 0.827, you're below that average, but again, you have to consider what I just mentioned, the other fire levies and the park levy. And if I could move to the next slide. Really what I'm pointing out here is something you all see in your tax bills, is you see everything that St. Charles pays for, St. Charles resident pays for. And if you add those two up, these two levies that are here, St. Charles has pensions separate from and just about everybody does, from their corporate levy, that this is what the levy totals out to, which we multiplied to get that tax bill. And the other important thing to point out is that the school district is the substantial portion of the property tax bill. You can see that they're at 64% and you're at 10%, and that's where the other taxing districts fall into all that. So, and the other thing I wanted to point out is this item here, which Heather already mentioned, that 28.7, nearly 30% of your budget, operating budget, is determined, the revenue source is determined by the property taxes. So again, just some basic information. Now the next slide is what we're trying to determine is the tax effect, the property tax effect. And again, on the percentages that we had determined, that, you know, you could go up to the 4.99% without the truth in taxation issue. That's explained a little bit. And you can see that someone who pays has a home worth $300,000, at the 4.99%, their taxes will go up $40, 40.94. And if you go with the EAV increase of 2.84, now the county makes an estimate of what they know that the equalized assessed value throughout the community is going to increase, and they give you that every year. I don't think DuPage gives you that though, but Kane County does. And they'll let you know what that increase is, so you could tax accordingly. And you can see that someone with a $300,000 home at 4.99% will pay the $40.94, and at 2.84%, the additional will be $23.30. The difference is $17. Department. Now, when I go over this next slide, the histories, again, hard to reach a conclusion on that. The important thing to note is that the major decreases that you see for some of these communities and for some of these taxing districts are usually when their debt falls off. And when they're going down 30%, they're not decreasing their operation 30%. They have a debt or something else that causes that big decrease. The other thing to point out is that very few communities do what you guys did. From this period on, you can see that there's a 0% increase for a number of years. Then you went up to 4%, then at 1.9%, so you made a concerted effort to keep this low. And again, what we're trying to do with this is just to do our due diligence. You know, this was pointed out that you do have debt service obligations that are increasing. You do have some revenue streams that are increasing. Your sales tax, particularly on the cannabis and the automobiles, those seem to be increasing substantially. And but the issue is you're not funding your vehicle replacements, and you haven't done that fully over the past 2 years. And that's going to continue to decrease. You're going to have to take that revenue from somewhere. To me, that's just an operating expense. Eventually, you pay for that. You could kick that can down the road, but eventually there's fire trucks that are several $1 million, and you know, those things are difficult to replace, and you started setting this aside many years ago. And then you have these other replacements as well. You're going to be funding them as capital if you don't continue to fund those replacement funds, which you have a great track record on. But the past 2 years, I think it was $1.2 million last year, and about $500,000 previous year, correct? Yes. 700,000 and 1.4. 1.4? Yeah. So when you're reviewing your budget, you know, if you're not coming up with those revenue streams, you're going to have to eat into this again. And that's, you know, the logical way to do that, other than some of the other things you have going on in St. Charles and other than some of the operating expenses. But you do have a considerable pension obligation. It's going to have to be addressed at some point, if not this year, pretty soon. They're right over 50% funded. That is low, and that is going to have to be addressed in some way. These are slow-moving problems and slow-moving corrections. Your fire department is at about 60% and getting better. You know, that seems to be improving. It's always good rule of thumb is to be somewhere in the 80s with your pension funds. Are towns your size all in the 80s? No. You're not the only one that's experiencing those problems. But what Heather had mentioned that nobody's had mentioned is that's a secure revenue stream that you have a lot of control over. And, you know, I've been doing this over 40 years, and this is always a difficult discussion to have. And I've had to have this in 19 different municipalities that I consulted for and for that I was a full-timer for. But it's good to come up with just a solid policy from year to year of what you're going to do. And we've talked about this before, and those of you who've been here for a long time, you run into this with water rates a lot, where you keep your water rates low, and then all of a sudden, in an 8-year period, you got to go up 40%. I think people understand a certain percentage and then an increase, and the same thing with the property taxes. You did what you were intended to do when, you know, when property values were low, you did not increase, and they were starting to go up. At least I think I would have preferred if you went with the EAV increases, that would have brought you up a little bit. But as I said, you do have a debt issue that you have to deal with. That is not going to go away. That has to be funded. You do have these replacement funds, and you do have to secure your operations. Again, we're open for discussion now, and you know, anything else you guys wanted to add? No?
Okay, well, why don't we start at this side of the table, and we'll go around.
I'll speak first. Obviously, this is the part of the job when we sign up that is the least fun. Obviously, telling anybody that they're going to be taxed more, but you know, from seeing what I've seen so far since I got on the city council, I feel like all the department heads run their departments pretty lean. Obviously, you know, as we saw tonight, just with the insurance, costs do increase. It's unavoidable. So you know, with things like that, like that insurance increase, I mean, the whole city as a whole has to support these things. So with that being said, I mean, I'm in support of this.
I just had two questions. Heather, when you opened up the presentation, the first slide basically said that, and I think you continued on it, a house that's worth $400,000 was going to have a tax of 10.8, I think it was, or 10.7. Is that before or after?
So you're talking about the slide right here? So the, if we kept...
This one, oh yeah, well, yeah, the first one, I guess. That would work too, but I'm just trying to figure out the first slide that you used and how it compares to where we're going to go at 4.99. I believe so. Or, yeah, right towards the bottom. So 10,900.
Yeah, that tax would be about $11,000, and we're saying a $400,000 house.
Yeah.
But that's based on a 4.99 rate, or is that before?
So that,
Currently. That's what it is currently. Okay, and then on slide 7, a little bit deeper into the presentation, it talked about, right here, is that a yearly increase or a monthly?
that's
yearly.
a yearly increase. So if we stuck with the same way that we had done it the last couple years and went with just the increase in EAV, that gray box represents what the increase would be if we stayed consistent. The yellow box is if we went to the truth and taxation limit. So you're talking about $17 difference on a $300,000 house and $25
Per year.
per year.
So monthly, we're talking in the ballpark of $3 to $5 or $10 or somewhere like that. Okay, thank you.
I guess I'm thinking we're in the process of hiring an economic development director, and I have very high expectations that they're going to bring us a variety of businesses to our community, and with that should come sales tax revenue. And for me, I would like to wait and see how that works out before I commit to raising the property tax levy.
I agree with my colleague. I'd like to wait. I'm comfortable with keeping it at the level with EAV. High expectation. I think we're going to do great moving forward for this year. Thanks, Nick, though, for putting everything together. But no, so that's my thoughts.
Wow. So this is definitely a tough one because I see it's hard to determine, and this is the first conversation that we've had. We've had this for a few days, and I'm working really fast to seek to have an understanding. So the first thing about this as we go through, I would never want to see this on a consent agenda. There's always ways to cut, and some of those ways are really bad. There's a lot to consider here, and I'm doing my work to try and understand because, I mean, I am very sensitive to, inflation is coming. Of course, inflation is also going to drive sales tax revenue. I think that we've done a good job holding the line, but a lot of the things that you were just saying, I still need to seek to understand as far as like, okay, comparing us to other communities, how much was the fire, how much does that weigh into and truly understand this? I mean, I think that we're going to have to take measures to make sure that we're running a balanced budget. I think that is incredibly important. I think we need to provide people great services. I still need to do the work to see that we need to do this, but I don't have to work too hard to see. So we've only had this for 3 days. I think that we're doing a phenomenal job. I appreciate the analysis. I'm not all the way there yet. But I want to be fiscally responsible and make sure that we can pay to provide great services to the city. But I also think that I don't mind not raising taxes. I think if we're going to raise taxes, we need to know exactly what we're doing, and I'm still looking for more information.
Yeah, and just quickly to respond to one of those points is that there are some things that I want to do moving forward, and that is one, I tend to operate in a very conservative budgeting manner. I want to reduce everything as much as possible. So year to year, there's some expectations on line items, and we're really talking about big picture items, projects, and not getting into the minutia of supplies and things like that that I think should be relatively flat year to year, minus some minimal costs. So that is one thing I'll be doing as we enter budget discussions. However, the other thing I'm looking at is trying to correct some of these items, like the replacement programs that haven't been funded, and wanting to make sure that we are staying on top of vehicles for police officers, and having the funds available not only to make the purchases, but ready in the future as well, because we've been making the purchases without the reserves to do so. So we're going to start getting to a point between the debt reserve payments or the debt service payments, as well as those reserves and those capital replacement programs, that we're going to have to start cutting something major in order to not be able to do those, or to continue paying for those services.
And we're still speculating what those major things would be, and I want to have a better understanding instead of raising taxes because of an undefined burden that hangs out in the future. But I'm doing the work too. So like I said, right now I expect, to very cautiously be supportive, and I think that our city and the department heads do a really good job, but I don't have the amount of information I need to be comfortable with this, but I do have the amount of trust in the job that everybody's doing. But, I just don't want to see it on a consent agenda ever. Thank you.
My next question, when does this have to be passed by?
So we would vote on the estimated property tax levy estimates at the next city council meeting, and that has to be done so many days in advance of the formal approval in December, and then it has to be ultimately approved and filed with the county in December, by the end of the month.
So what you're saying is, we don't have, we couldn't table this in the next meeting?
No, so we
That's
could do it next Monday and have additional discussion next Monday, but then we would need to vote on the estimated numbers at the second city council meeting in November to give us the window to approve it in December.
Okay, so we could still table for, you're basically saying one...
We could have additional discussion next week still.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Alderman Bancroft.
So I'll call it the mystery of the lack of replacement of equipment. I'm on a council, I looked at it since 2012. I participated in all of those votes that kept the property tax levy consistent, as did some of my colleagues here. I don't remember, and could be faulty memory. I don't remember a discussion about foregoing replacement of equipment because of decisions made on holding the tax levy constant. I just don't remember it. I don't remember having that discussion. I don't remember knowing it. I don't remember seeing it on a chart. Do you?
It was like one of many things. I do remember seeing it, but it was one of many things that got,
I don't think we've ever discussed actually relating it to the property tax.
No, I'm not using it as an example.
Postponing vehicle replacement for a year, but never, I don't remember ever being related to this discussion right now.
And then I kept hearing the resounding slapping each other on the back for the addition to reserves from every surplus we had.
Yeah, that I remember, yeah.
So none of that makes sense to me. And so if we're, I think I lean towards supporting this increase because I think we're going to need the revenue, and I think your debt obligations aren't going away, and you have a variety of other reasons that we probably need to get ahead of this, and I think it's going to be the mature decision to do it. I go back to, just the understanding of the math of all of that, and, the last 5 years, we've added to reserves. Hundreds of thousands of dollars.
And Colleen, I'm going to pull you up here for a second as well. I know at the retreat, Colleen had mentioned the fact that we did end up with a surplus at the end of the 2021 fiscal year, and that was because the vehicle replacement was not funded, vehicles were still purchased, and then we got additional CARES Act money in. So at least this previous fiscal year, I can say that we ended up in a situation with some revenue we hadn't planned for, some expenditures that were still made, and some moving around of items in the budget to have a balanced budget, but it's something we couldn't sustain year to year, and that's the point we're getting to, is that this isn't sustainable to continue to not fund those programs, to continue to make those purchases, and then have our debt service escalating, because it is escalating year to year, and I think we're going to be over at the highest in 2028, somewhere around there.
So if I can be so bold, what you're hearing on this council is probably a willingness to consider this because of the responsibility.
Sure.
But also what you're hearing is you've proved what we, you've proved what we forego, over the past 5 or whatever, however many years. Again, to my knowledge, we were adding to reserves during that period of time, right, wrong, or indifferent, suspension of vehicle replacement or different, I don't know. We're adding to reserves. That means we're taking money from people and putting it in accounts. And then you didn't do what I had seen in the past, which is a bunch of scary graphs of lines going up and down, whatever the worst way was, and tell us that this is where the disaster is going to come if you don't do X. And oh, by the way, we're depositing $400,000, $200,000, $300,000 into reserves. So what you really need to do is make the case for what we should do, and you haven't done it, in my opinion. And I'm a big supporter of staff, as you know, but my criticism is you showed me the math and how it works, and you showed me the way Illinois always looks at taxes, and that is, oh, it's only going to be $10 a person, or, that's a horrible way to make a decision. The right way to make the decision is, okay, from a responsible standpoint, if we look at the next 5 years, this is what our obligation is going to be, kind of similar to what we did at the retreat, maybe to the next level. This is how, this is where life is going, and this is kind of why you either need to go X or Y. I don't think you've done it.
I'm not sure what's left to say. The problem or the question I have, we spoke about this, is more so along, the narrative. Is this something we need to do to keep up with the market reality? Where we are, we haven't touched this for over a decade. Staff is suggesting this is the time to start having this conversation. I think this council, that makes sense. But if it's to go fund something like vehicle replacement, other things, it starts to get very gray, and that's where the numbers start getting a little lost. With my colleagues up here, I am supportive of this. Looking at something 11 years, not touching it, being realistic of the services that we offer, the cost of doing business, I'm going to argue an extra, cup of coffee potentially for somebody a month that they're not probably going to notice and looking that closely is something that I can get on board with because it allows us to keep the high service levels where we need to be. I'm supportive of that. But I think we need to be clear when we start moving forward what we're trying to accomplish here. This is something we haven't touched for 11 years, and that's what's driving this conversation. First, if we don't do this, we can't replace vehicles or we can't do some of these other things. And I want to be more clear about what that is.
And I think if I had presented in the budget the previous fiscal year, I would have presented the information as such as we're cutting our vehicle replacement program, so we need to talk about tax levy because now we're not funding things. So rather than just handing simply a balanced budget that looks like we're okay and revenue in is revenue out, it would have been presented in such a way that we are at that point, that here's where the shortcoming is that we cannot fund the existing programs we have, so we either need to cut these programs or we need to look at our property tax levy. So I think the case is demonstrated in the way that the budget translated last year because of the fact that the only reason we were in surplus was because of the CARES Act. But certainly understand the perspective of we want to see the escalation of debt service payments. We want to see the escalation budget year to year. It's going to be flexible. I'm going to look at the numbers and say, where do we need to cut? Because I will not present you a budget that's not balanced. If we don't have the tax levy to support it, my recommendations are going to be cuts to services. So in no situation am I going to come to you and say, guess what, we've got $3 million. We need to figure out where it's coming from. I'm going to cut $3 million from the budget. So it's a little difficult of a perspective to say, I don't want to create the situation where we're already in deficit.
I was just going to say, and I think I said it, but just to be clear. More than likely I am supportive of going this route because I think that from what I understand of our oncoming debt obligations, we probably don't have a whole ton of choice. Unless we are going to, do something more drastic in another fashion. But I think we've got to make that case because you've got to empower everybody on the staff to go back and talk to their folks who are going to say, what are you doing? Raising my taxes $30. Well, the answer is, here's why. And right now, what I just gave you is all I know about, where we are financially. Sure. So.
I read, as part of tonight's meeting prep, I read the minutes from the retreat and where we started this conversation. And I made my point then. I think it's time. I think it's, but to Alderman Bancroft's point, I have to say that yes, especially with, you know, half our council being new and this is their first budget conversation, that it's important that that you guys equip us with the reasoning.
Sure.
I mean, we've talked about the pedestrian bicycle. That is something that's been pushed for how many years? You know, because of this exact same kind of thing. Those are the things, you know, not just vehicles, but there's projects. And it's at the end of the budget, if you look, you'll see what stuff gets pushed back.
Right.
And it, you know, some of it is, you know, is it need versus want? But it's getting to a point where a lot of it's want.
And I think that's exactly it. Those are the typical items I think that have been cut in years past that will continue to get cut. And then the difficulty with it is the budget conversation comes after the tax levy. So if the money's not there from the tax levy, then by the time it comes to budget, there's no more option to correct it. It's become, all right, we don't have the money, so therefore these things are getting cut. So it's a situation now where we have the opportunity to have the funds available to do some of these projects, and certainly approving it 1 year doesn't mean it's set in stone for every future year either. We can always come back from that amount when we see some additional revenue. Hotel tax gets going again. Some of those items that have been diminished for the last couple of years do bounce back. We're not stuck at staying and it's forever in place like this. So right now things have been cut, things have been pushed back. This is an opportunity to gain and capture some of that revenue to ensure we can do those projects and then revisit it in future years. But certainly hear the feedback and the understanding and wanting some additional information, especially on some of those debt service schedules and things like that that are going to come due and be non-starters for discussion that we absolutely have to pay, insurance being one of them, to support that idea.
Oh, yeah, and materials, everything. I mean, there's all kinds of things. Thank you.
I guess my question is, the last 3 years, the 419 and 230, are those numbers that we voted on last year, or is that just the EAV?
So that was the increase in the EAV. Now, Kelly, I don't know if I know you weren't completely involved in the tax levy presentation either. I think it was presented in such a way that here's what we're doing.
Okay.
And sticking with the EAV.
Okay. So it was not a number the board came up with, or the the council came up with.
I believe
more
it
of
was
a
a
percentage.
staff recommendation.
Okay. And then secondly, when I look through here with Alderman Bancroft, I agree. Every other municipality was raising from 2010 to 2017, and we held steady. You would think there would be some reason to hold steady because there's got to be reserves. I mean, there should have been reserves if we're not doing things. And it just seems like it's all of a sudden like, okay, now in 18, 19, 20, we start doing the EAV, and I agree with it. But we should have been doing it a long time ago and not blaming anyone here. I'm new also. But it just seems like a little weird that we should have had some foresight back 6, 7 years ago to start levying some taxes and to increase on that $6 million that we left on the table.
So from staff's perspective, if we don't make a change, is your opinion that we will have to have serious conversations come budget time about black and white cuts, things we won't be able to do?
It is my position, just because of the way I operate. That conversation would have already happened with last year's budget, and from my perspective, because I would have said either we need to not purchase some of these vehicles, like the new fire engine we just purchased, or we need to talk about some other of these supplementary cuts. It sounds like some of these things were cut already, but that would have been my starter for this conversation already.
Yep.
Okay, I'm sorry, Alderman Bancroft.
Yeah, so to Alderman Ballo's point, you know, I'm not sure what the process for making those adjustments has been historically, but I think if you want to, if we are empowered to make this decision, and we are hearing from staff that this is, you know, probably the direction we need to go for a variety of reasons, including what are upcoming, you know, debt obligations. You know, it isn't just also about the information, in my opinion. It's also about who's making the decision. Like, where does that come from? You know, that we're suspending some, you know, repurchase of a vehicle. Like whether it's at the end of a meeting in a footnote or whatever. I mean, you know, those are really important decisions, and I think that maybe what's been missing is sort of this, you know, 10,000-foot level understanding of, well, here's the decisions you made to hold the tax levy constant at $12,055,000 for the last 8 years, and this is the consequence. You know, the decision to go to the EAV piece of this, you know, was really an initiative of the council. It was like, you know, it's silly that property values are finally going up and we're not capturing, you know, some level.
Money on the table.
It became somewhat of a no-brainer, to do. But you're asking us to take the next step, and I think that, you know, that next step isn't just an information so we can make the decision. Then it's also, tell me for the next year, what's the decision process? How do things get tabled or not tabled, or, you know, what's the impact of it?
Yeah, I mean, if you're asking that question directly now for this, I mean, the decision has to be made for the tax levy this month to be passed and approved in December to be implemented for next year's tax bill. So if this decision is to stick with the past practice of the EAV, that gets implemented, and then come budget time, we know what our revenue streams or expected revenue stream is to make some of those decisions. That gets input into the budget, and if we are having some shortfalls, then we start talking about cuts. But the revenues and the expectations of the revenues, MFT, tax levy, all of the items that we go into our budget for expected revenues are set at that point. So there's not an opportunity really to come up with additional revenue as we're doing budget discussions. It's already in place at that point. It's a matter of matching our expenditures to our revenue.
I just want, and again, I know I'm beating a dead horse, but you said shortfalls. So I'm almost certain, and every year I've been here, we've had a surplus. Have we had a surplus?
It's been surplus, but we've taken from reserves.
Yeah, we've had to take from reserves.
No, we deposited in reserves. That's what a surplus is.
We took, what, $2 million out last time?
I don't believe so.
I think we took a little out for the police station as well, I thought.
We took
So we made an investment in the police station.
No, yeah.
My point is that from an operating budget standpoint, on an annual basis for the last 5 or 10 years, have we made transfers to reserves or transfers from reserves?
From reserves. That's how I remember it.
For the police station, we transferred $3 million.
So that's an investment in a capital asset.
Correct. Yes. But what you're asking, like this year, the $3 million was in addition to the general fund reserve. But quite frankly, you can't just look at the general fund in isolation, because the general fund is the funding source of the annual required contributions for the police department, which have been going up, and right now total approximately $6 million. The general fund funds the capital improvements that are specific for the Public Works Division, for the IS Division, our ERP system, for our storm stores. Those are normally funded. Right now, we've been funding a piece, but basically issuing debt and then funding the debt associated with that. Instead of having, let's have $1.5 million in cash purchase so we can maintain our debt. Also, we have, as was mentioned, other reserves that are being funded for copiers, for actually replacement vests for the police, for replacement radios for the fire department. Those are reserves that get funded that come from the general fund. So looking at the general fund in isolation, hey, we have $3 million. We need to take a look at capital improvement funds. We need to take a look at all the reserve funds at any time. And you need to look at the fire and police pension funds. We are funding the minimum requirement. Our police pension fund right now is funded at a 50% level. Fire is at a 69% level. 50% level, all my experience is usually less funded than the fire department. However, 50% is 50%.
You're making my case.
Why is it 50%?
I appreciate that.
You need to pull these funds together and say, okay, let's take a look at all of this and see where we're at. And the TIF funds, special revenue funds, also come into play with respect to debt, because there are three TIFs that are not funding their debt service payments without the assistance of the general.
So this is exactly what you need to get us to where we need to be. That's what we've got to do.
So we can get more into the nitty-gritty of the finances next week if council is comfortable with that mechanism. It's sort of hard to try to look at the big picture and focus on the details all at once, and separating those out may be a little bit more effective, so we can just focus on that now that there's the understanding of the actual impact, the rates, the levies, the burden on the taxpayers.
Wait, hold on, excuse me, Alderman Besner.
Oh, sure. You can go. Where do infrastructure projects fit into this? Because over the last 5, 6, 7, 8 years, we've discussed our ageability of our roads, where that was going to be millions and millions of dollars. We've discussed main water trunk lines that we need to replace. We've talked about, you know, just water in general, whether it's our water or it comes from Lake Michigan or phosphorus levels and all that. So that's where I see the point of looking at any kind of increase for, not to take anything away from vests for the police. I'm sure we could accommodate all that. But I'm looking at more of the larger projects. And going back to what Alderman Bancroft was saying, you know, if we all have to discuss this with constituents, the last thing I'm going to tell them is we're going to be replacing police cars. That's the last thing I'll be saying. So.
And it is a point for public safety, but I understand what you're saying. Water really should be its own self-sustaining fund, any of those improvements, but I think road projects are probably a great example. MFT is a good source of revenue for us for those projects, but anything that we're receiving that's above and beyond our operations can certainly be dedicated towards that. I know we've talked about dedicating certain revenue sources towards some of those type of projects, but because we're not fully funding our operations right now, we're not able to dedicate and earmark some of those funds. So that would open up some of those opportunities to start saying, we're going to add additional contributions to police pension fund and get fully funded on that. We're going to dedicate X number of dollars for road projects each year.
Yeah, that would be a little bit more broad where we could, I think, and a few other aldermen express that, where we could get that, like more of a whole package versus just that. Thank you.
Well, I appreciated the comparables to other municipalities. I know that's really, you know, rough and pie in the sky, but for the most part, I'm wondering, is it possible to do comparables to other taxing bodies that our constituents are paying into? I mean, does the school district pay their maximum levy every year, and, you know, and things like that?
That is here on this slide, so you can see what everybody's done, at least since 09, 10. This would be just for a St. Charles resident, so the average taxing bodies on those bills.
Right, but I wonder what their levy is, you know.
Like their actual rate?
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. That's what I'm asking. You know, are they all at whatever their maximum is? I'm guessing is it 4.992? I mean, I have a feeling that there are a few that are, and that would help in our dialogue as well.
And
Alderman Mungard?
You go ahead.
And the 2.84 specified here is not really an actual number until next year, correct? So it could be higher or lower depending on what the EAV is. It's not set in stone at 2.84.
Right. It is, King County provided an estimate of what they believe property values are increasing. This is property values for all properties, residential, commercial, and industrial. And these are the estimates should increase in 24 on average.
Yeah, so you can either do EAV or the max, you can't do another number, correct? Or you can do another?
Anything below that 4.99%.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's just the limit, that's our limit.
Okay, any comments over here? Alderman Wobble.
What role do you see alternative revenue streams playing on this that we discussed at the city
So,
retreat?
for example, like a push tax or any of those
Exactly.
items. Some of that will have to be vetted out on how it's going to be funded, but this is a major, large-scale impact to us immediately. Some of these taxes will be smaller dollar amounts that I don't foresee having the same impact as a regular increase on the EAV would have for us. So some of it has to be fleshed out to see what we start seeing with some of those numbers, because we're not going to know what those numbers are until they start coming in.
Thank you.
Yeah, correct.
Questions from up here? Any questions from the audience? Mayor, do you have any questions or comments you'd like to make? Okay, thank you. So it looks like, judging from the comments there, I don't think we're ready to vote tonight, are we?
Do we need to vote?
We don't, as long as everybody's comfortable bringing this information back next week, but by next week we will have to have some direction on how we do want to proceed, because we do have to vote on that estimated number at the next city council meeting.
So if we postpone it today, it would be 2 weeks from today at the committee meeting?
We could still bring it forward at the next
Committee meeting?
Monday's committee meeting. I realize that wouldn't typically fall on that, but Well, we have to vote on it in 2 weeks. So the only option would be to take it out of sequence and take it at next Monday's committee meeting. I realize that's not the correct committee meeting, but that would be the way to do it, because we have to vote on it.
I have no problem, I'm just trying to get the timetable
Yes,
right.
correct. We have to vote on it at the,
So we need to vote on it by the end of the month?
correct.
Okay, thank you, that's what I wanted.
By the 15th.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. But it has to be voted.
The next city council meeting, it has to be voted on.
Next city council meeting,
Correct.
2 weeks, correct?
Correct.
Because we have to publish in the paper.
Yes.
Okay, no, I just want to know the process.
So what's the right way to do it? Would you like to see a motion to continue definitely to next week, or, just go ahead and put together a meeting with an agenda item?
I will just put together a meeting with an agenda item for next week.
Okay.
Okay, now
I
that
appreciate you
would that be
hearing
on, would we have a separate government and operations committee then?
We can hold it that way. I mean, I guess,
What's your,
I
what do you think?
would defer to the mayor on whether she's comfortable having this on government services or having a separate government operations committee meeting.
I would say we'd keep it on the same committee meeting, just extend it to
Okay.
having a new one next week if that works with rules next.
Yeah,
We can do that.
Yeah, we can still post for
Yes,
it. We have
and
time.
I would ask that all city council, is this on? Yeah. That you please, if you do have questions in the meantime, reach out to Heather and additionally staff so that we can get to some sort of consensus here to move this thing forward. Also reach out to me and just be prepared that if we do not do this, it's not a threat, but if we don't do this, some of the things that we've mentioned recently, like a bikeability, walkability study, and some of the other things we talked about, the retreat, we won't be likely moving forward in this next budget year. So just be prepared with that those are the additional things that we first have to fund our current operations before we move forward with some of these new projects.
Thank you. So, first off, I'll go there in a question before I say stuff. Yes.
So I think that's a really good point. There's always going to be things that come up budget-wise we can't do, we can do. What happens with an economic development director? Now we can do something else. I think you said in the summit, the strategy meeting, where it's time. This might just be a time. I think we have to be careful not being afraid of, the idea of we're raising taxes. Oh gosh, hang on a second. Take a look at where we are. We don't do this every single year. This might be time to look at the market reality of where we are, not through the lens of what we might have to cut or what another development director might bring. This might be the appropriate time to look at doing this. And it might not, but I want to make sure that we're not getting caught between three different narratives of what we're trying to do.
And to your point, and to Alderman Paylater's, and I think Alderman Bancroft's too, I think it's important that, if we collectively do this, that we need to lean on staff to get a clear message of why we're doing this, to build awareness in the community, educate the community why this is important, so we can continue to deliver the level of service that we traditionally do in St. Charles. And I know, Heather, you're committed to that, to help the council get to that point, correct? Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
So, first off, more questions from the council or anybody. So, I guess we're going to do, we're going to have a special government operations meeting next Monday, which is, I think, December 8th, correct?
November 8th, yes.
November,
Yes,
thank
correct.
you.
Yep.
So, yeah, okay, so we will,
And what I would just ask, if there are any additional pieces of information that anybody would like to see contained within the packet, just let me know, and I'm happy to provide that as well. And I will work to try to get the packet out a little bit earlier than standard, just so you have a little more time to digest some of that information, since I anticipate it probably will be pretty heavy with some finances.
Okay.
thanks. So now to our attorney, is this a motion to table or postpone?
No, I think tonight you're just not taking any action on this matter. It'll just be on the next agenda as this matter again. You don't need to have a motion.
You don't need to
No.
do anything?
No.
Okay, thank you. Everybody comfortable with that idea? Thank you. Hey,
Thank you.
no, any additional items from anybody? I know there's no executive session. I guess, can I have a motion and a second to adjourn?
So
Moved by Weber, seconded by
Second.
Waddell. Roll call, please.
Petrola?
Yes.
Wirball?
yes.
Besner?
Yes.
Weber?
Yes.
Bawa?
Yes.
Paylater?
Yes.
Bongard?
Yes.
Bancroft?
Yes.
Lencioni?
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. This meeting is adjourned. Oh, I knew this. There's a variety of things.